I managed to collect almost 200 very rare historical photographs that you haven't seen yet. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most. Clara Bow escaped a violent Brooklyn childhood with a mentally ill mother and alcoholic father to become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. After appearing in more than 50 films, she became the original It Girl and the face of the rebellious 1920s flapper. Taken between August 1, 1864 and August 1, 1866, this bizarre photograph shows a man pretending to spoon-feed a human-like doll. The unsettling scene was created decades before horror films made lifelike dolls a symbol of fear. In 1971, Ludmila Rodina hand-painted a doll at the Alma-Ata Children's Toy Factory in the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. Each face was finished by a worker, giving these mass-produced Soviet dolls small but unmistakable differences. In 1960, a fashion model posed with local children among the ruins of Wells Street in Chicago. Her elegant dress and high heels created a shocking contrast with the destroyed homes surrounding them. 16-year-old Diana Spencer served as a bridesmaid when her elder sister Jane married Robert Fellows in 1978. 3 years later, Diana married Prince Charles, while Fellows later became Queen Elizabeth's private secretary. A Ukrainian woman from Yabluniv wears an extraordinary traditional headdress in this photograph taken by J. Dutkevich in 1899. Her layered necklaces and elaborate floral headpiece reveal the rich folk dress of the Kosiv region, now part of Ivano-Frankivsk, Ukraine. In 1917, Austro-Hungarian soldiers dug trenches into the frozen Ortler Alps, where some positions stood more than 3,000 meters above sea level. On this brutal front, freezing cold, avalanches and thin air could be as deadly as enemy fire. In the 1980s, a lone protester walked across Miami Beach carrying a sign that warned, "You are headed for hell." Her target was the revealing beachwear worn by the younger generation. On September 3, 1940, a United States Navy Devastator crashed into the starboard catwalk of the aircraft carrier Yorktown during landing. Deck crews rushed to secure the damaged torpedo bomber before it could fall into the sea. On March 18, 1925, the tri-state tornado tore across Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing 695 people. It remains the deadliest tornado in United States history, with 2,207 injured and entire communities reduced to wreckage. This is Super 6-4 flying over Mogadishu before a rocket-propelled grenade destroyed its tail rotor on October 3, 1993. 3 crewmen died in the crash, and pilot Michael Durant survived, was captured by Somali fighters, and released 11 days later. This collection of more than 160 Imperial Russian photographs included rare, candid images of Nicholas II and his family. Estimated at just $400, the archive sold for $5,200, 13 times the expected price. Eleanor Roosevelt holds her 7-month-old son Franklin in 1909, shortly before he died of influenza. 5 years later, she and Franklin Roosevelt gave another son the same name, and he survived to adulthood. In January 1976, Elvis attended the funeral of a Denver police officer who had taken his own life. As an honorary Denver police captain, Elvis wore the full-dress uniform given to him for the ceremony. Chauncey Moreland became a star circus performer after joining Adam Forepaw's show at just 15 years old. Known as a professional fat man, he reportedly reached 748 pounds, yet audiences remembered him most as a warm storyteller who adored his pet squirrel, Minnie. Dee Snider married Suzette on October 23, 1981, years before Twisted Sister made him a global rock star. Suzette later designed the band's famous costumes and makeup, helping create Dee's wild stage image. These giant-headed riders paraded through Nice in 1910 on donkeys, turning the city streets into a bizarre spectacle. The Carnival of Nice was first recorded in 1294, making it one of the oldest carnival traditions in the world. In August 1942, Detroit's Greyhound station overflowed as wartime factory workers, soldiers, and families packed the terminal. With new cars unavailable and tires strictly rationed, long-distance buses became one of the few practical ways to cross America. Clint Eastwood poses with a revolver in 1962 while starring as Cowboy Rowdy Yates in the hit television series Rawhide. 2 years later, a fistful of dollars transformed him from a television actor into an international Western legend. Robert De Niro celebrates his 34th birthday during filming of The Deer Hunter in 1977. The cast performed the terrifying Russian roulette scenes with real bullets placed on the table, but never loaded into the gun. A patrol from the Monte Rosa Division moves through the hills near Roquette in late 1944. Trained in Germany, these Italian troops later helped launch a surprise attack that briefly drove Allied forces back in Garfagnana. 2 men carry this giant mask during Surova, a winter ritual in Divotino, Bulgaria. Survakari wear terrifying faces and heavy bells, marching from house to drive away evil and bring health and a rich harvest. In 1992, a one-day Disneyland passport cost $28.75, while a child ticket was $23. Unlike today's digital passes, these paper tickets were stamped at the gate and became rare pieces of Disney history. In the late 1800s, women often swam in heavy wool dresses, knee-length trousers, stockings, and shoes to keep their bodies covered. By the early 1900s, suits became lighter and tighter, but showing too much leg could still lead to arrest. The Hollywood sign originally read Hollywoodland when it was built in 1923 to advertise a new housing development. The last 4 letters were removed in 1949, creating the famous landmark seen today. The 1950s transformed open farmland into enormous suburbs, with builders producing nearly identical houses at record speed. Cheap mortgages and new highways helped millions of families move outward, but the developments often excluded black buyers through racial discrimination. A young couple poses at packed Coney Island in New York in 1947, when millions visited its beach each year. Behind their playful moment, the crowded shore shows how quickly Americans returned to leisure after World War II. In 1926, Evelyn Brent and Louise Brooks played sisters Mame and Janie Walsh in the silent comedy drama Love 'Em and Leave 'Em. The film gave Brooks an early major role just before she became one of the most recognizable faces of the silent era. Sophia Loren rests beside Frank Sinatra between takes of The Pride and the Passion in Spain in 1957. During filming, Cary Grant fell in love with Loren and asked her to marry him, but she chose Carlo Ponti. Photographed in the 1860s, these men belonged to the Yangban, the elite class that dominated politics, land, and education in Joseon, Korea. Their status depended on family rank and brutal civil service exams based on Confucian classics. On July 25, 1945, American B-29 Superfortress bombers flew past Mount Fuji during the final weeks of the war. Their long-range missions from the Mariana Islands brought Japan's industrial cities within reach of devastating air raids. Rita Hayworth relaxes aboard Errol Flynn's yacht, Zaka, during the filming of The Lady from Shanghai in 1946. The movie shocked fans by replacing her famous red hair with a short blonde cut, while her marriage to director Orson Welles was collapsing. In 1954, Inge Morath photographed this Irish traveler family beside their brightly painted wagons in Killorglin, County Kerry. Her image preserved a way of life already under growing pressure from poverty, discrimination, and forced settlement. Hungarian soldiers and grazing cattle surround a Royal Hungarian Air Force Messerschmitt ME-210CA1 after a forced landing. Hungary built this troubled German design under license and used it for reconnaissance and ground attacks. Italian M-13/40 tanks of the Littorio Division crossed the Libyan desert in May or June 1942. Their crews soon entered the Battle of Gazala, where Axis forces shattered British defenses and captured Tobruk. This rare photograph shows Ho Chi Minh playing billiards during a visit to China in the 1960s. Away from official meetings, the Vietnamese revolutionary leader enjoyed a quiet game while the war in his homeland was rapidly intensifying. This 1871 portrait shows Dr. George Campbell, my great-great-great-granduncle. He was a close friend of Florence Nightingale and Henry Bonham Carter, linking him directly to one of history's greatest medical reformers. A Ukrainian sister and brother pose for their last photo together in Ivane Zolote in 1940. Soon afterward, war and occupation tore through the region, and the siblings never met again. This is the former Japanese battleship Setsu being dismantled after the Second World War. Once one of Japan's first dreadnoughts, it was disarmed under the Washington Naval Treaty and later converted into a radio-controlled target ship for combat training. These young workers carried the tools of a hard trade, wearing paint-covered overalls instead of protective gear. Their clothes reveal years of manual labor, when dangerous jobs often came with little training and almost no safety rules. In 1984, presidential candidate and civil rights leader Jesse Jackson received a roaring welcome beside Fidel Castro in Havana. His controversial mission helped reopen dialogue between the two enemies and secured the release of 48 Cuban and American prisoners. Australian soldiers of the 6th Battalion returned to base on August 19, 1966, one day after the Battle of Long Tan. Just 108 Australians had survived hours of attacks by a force estimated at more than 2,000 enemy troops. On April 4, 1967, Prime Minister Lester Pearson laughed beside Pierre Trudeau, John Turner, and Jean Chrétien after a cabinet shuffle. Remarkably, all four men in this photograph served as Prime Minister of Canada. Archaeologists survey a stone-filled site in Uppland, Sweden during the 1950s. This region holds thousands of ancient graves and rune stones, making it one of the richest areas for Viking Age discoveries. On August 18, 1944, a Sherman tank crushed a press jeep in France, killing Los Angeles Times reporter Tom Treanor. Medics treated the injured CBS correspondent beside the overturned wreck while Trainor's body lay behind them. Uday Hussein, the feared son of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, feeds one of his pet lions in this rare photograph. The animals lived inside his heavily guarded Baghdad compound during the 1990s. Italian prisoners of war stand under the guard of a United States Coast Guardsman during the invasion of Sicily in 1943. Just weeks later, Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, turning former partners into enemies across the country. Mae West was born on August 17, 1893, and became one of Hollywood's most controversial stars. Her bold jokes and open talk about sex led to arrests, censorship, and strict new film rules, but she refused to change. In the 1950s, beachgoers could protect their eyes with bizarre metal eyeshells that blocked harsh sunlight while leaving the face exposed. Their strange design later became familiar inside tanning beds, but these early versions were made for everyday sunbathing. This strange glove is often described as a secret self-defense weapon carried by women in Victorian London. Its sharp metal claws could turn a punch into a brutal attack, but its true origin remains uncertain. In 1972, 3 young women walked through Kabul in short skirts, reflecting the freedom enjoyed by many educated women in the capital. Within 20 years, civil war and Taliban rule would erase this public life and force women behind the veil. Hanako was a scarlet koi said to have lived for 226 years, from 1751 to 1977. Scientists estimated her age by studying growth rings on her scales, suggesting she survived Japan's feudal era, 2 world wars, and the beginning of the space age. After World War II, a bride made her wedding dress from the nylon parachute that had saved her airman fiancé over Asia. The rare fabric became both her gown and a reminder of how close he came to never returning home. In 1929, telephone repairmen climbed ladders and balanced directly on cables because bucket trucks were not yet standard equipment. One worker hangs high above the road with only a basic support belt, while the other repairs the line from a narrow ladder. This 1930s car was torn apart after crashing into a tree while a huge crowd gathered around the wreck. With no airbags, crumple zones, or standard seat belts, the people inside faced forces that modern cars are specifically designed to absorb. In the 1920s, Harley-Davidson motorcycles carried patients in sidecars, converted into enclosed stretchers. These unusual ambulances could reach narrow streets and rough roads faster than many cars, although every bump hit the patient directly. In 1948, the Chicago Daily Tribune printed "Dewey defeats Truman" before the final votes were counted. After winning, Harry Truman proudly held up the newspaper, turning one of history's worst predictions into an unforgettable photograph. In 1940, Japanese military observers toured the powerful Schonenburg fortress with German officers after France had fallen. The Maginot Line was still largely intact, but German forces had simply bypassed it through the Ardennes and attacked from behind. In 1965, Muhammad Ali dropped Sonny Liston in the first round with a punch so fast that many spectators missed it. Ali shouted at Liston to get up, while photographer Neil Leifer captured one of the most famous images in sports history. During the Wall Street crash of 1929, crowds packed the steps of Federal Hall across from the New York Stock Exchange. In just 2 days, the market lost roughly $30 billion, wiping out years of gains. In 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge began twisting violently in winds of just 42 miles per hour. Aeroelastic flutter tore apart the central span, and the only life lost was a dog trapped inside a car. Pruitt-Igoe was built as 33 modern towers, but crime, neglect, and funding failures made many apartments unlivable. In 1972, St. Louis began blasting the complex apart, creating one of history's most infamous images of failed public housing. In December 1914, a massive fire tore through Thomas Edison's West Orange factory complex, destroying 10 buildings and millions of dollars in equipment and inventory. Edison stood among the ruins, then ordered reconstruction to begin almost immediately. Hungarian rebels tore down Stalin's giant Budapest statue during the uprising of 1956. Only the bronze boots remained, while protesters dragged the severed head through the streets and smashed it into pieces. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton on its first voyage, praised as one of the safest ships ever built. 5 days later, it sank after hitting an iceberg, killing more than 1,500 people. This rare portrait shows a young Ethiopian woman photographed between 1885 and 1888, when cameras were still uncommon in the region. Her layered necklace, braided hair, and hand-woven clothing preserve details of Ethiopian dress that might otherwise have vanished. William Henry Jackson photographed Yellowstone's lower falls during the Hayden expedition in 1871, when few Americans had ever seen this remote landscape. His photographs helped convince Congress to protect Yellowstone as the world's first national park in 1872. Taken around 1890, this rare photograph shows local families beside homes built with thick thatched roofs to block tropical heat and heavy rain. The European woman seated in front may have been a missionary, revealing how colonial outsiders entered and documented everyday village life. After Kim Il-sung died in July 1994, vast crowds gathered beneath his giant statue in Pyongyang, laying flowers and weeping publicly. State television broadcast the mourning nationwide, turning his death into one of North Korea's largest displays of loyalty. 6 days after forcing President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr to resign in July 1979, Saddam Hussein staged this televised Ba'ath Party meeting and appeared to wipe away tears. 68 officials were accused of treason and arrested inside the hall, and 22 were later executed. Ans van Dyck, a Jewish woman who worked for the Nazis, lured other Jews out of hiding and handed them to the Gestapo. She was tried for treason in Amsterdam in 1947 and became the only Dutch woman executed for collaborating with the enemy. Psychiatric hospital patients sit inside an institution in 1938, before modern antipsychotic drugs existed. Treatment often relied on isolation, heavy sedatives, restraints, and dangerous procedures, while many patients remained confined for years. 9 days after British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen, starving women received loaves from one of the camp's 5 cookhouses. The camp was still gripped by a deadly typhus outbreak, and thousands died even after their rescue. Adolf Hitler bows as he shakes hands with President Paul von Hindenburg during the Day of Potsdam on March 21, 1933. The carefully staged ceremony linked Hitler to Germany's military past and helped disguise the dictatorship he was rapidly building. In 1946, Russell Lee photographed worshippers handling venomous snakes at a Pentecostal church in Kentucky. They believed a Bible verse promised divine protection, but snake bites sometimes killed the very preachers who practiced the ritual. German soldiers shelter in a dugout during an enemy artillery barrage in 1917, holding gas masks and rifles fitted with bayonets. They are waiting for the shelling to stop, knowing an infantry attack could follow within minutes. In 1908, 15-year-old Vance earned 75 cents for a 10-hour shift underground. His entire job was opening and closing this door for coal cars, then waiting alone in the darkness. In 1942, Japanese-American residents registered before the United States government forced them from their homes. Most were imprisoned in remote camps for years without charges or trials, while families lost businesses, property, and nearly everything they could not carry. In 1889, photographer Jacob Riis exposed this illegal Bayard Street lodging, where desperate tenants paid 5 cents for a crowded place to sleep. Several strangers shared one filthy room, showing the brutal conditions hidden inside New York City tenements. An Alabama family stands outside their wooden home during the Great Depression in 1936. Photographs like this exposed the severe rural poverty that left millions of Americans living in damaged homes with little food, money, or protection. In Stalin's final years, even the men closest to him knew that one accusation could mean prison or execution. After his death in 1953, they immediately began fighting for power, and secret police chief Lavrenti Beria was arrested and shot. Kidnapped heiress Patty Hearst was filmed holding a rifle as the Symbionese Liberation Army robbed this San Francisco bank on April 15, 1974. 2 civilians were shot during the escape, and Hearst was later captured and convicted of armed robbery. This is the last known photograph of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine before they vanished on Everest in 1924. Mallory's body was found 75 years later, but Irvine and the camera that could prove they reached the summit remain missing. Shimizu Jirocho was Japan's most famous 19th-century Yakuza boss, controlling gambling rings and commanding hundreds of followers. During the 1860s, he gained national power by working with government forces, yet shocked officials by secretly burying their defeated enemies with honor. This 1858 poster advertised the sale of enslaved people brought from Alabama to the St. Louis Hotel. It listed their names, ages, skills, families, and physical injuries as selling details, exposing how human beings were treated as property. In Moscow in 1918, workers dismantled the enormous bronze monument to Emperor Alexander III beside the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Built with public donations over nearly 12 years, it was unveiled before Nicholas II in 1912, but survived only 6 years. In August 1944, elderly Parisians helped build street barricades as resistance fighters rose against the German occupation. This woman carried sandbags under fire days before Allied troops liberated Paris. In 1919, a driver hauled a massive log down a steep dirt road in Fresno County, California. Early trucks had weak brakes and no modern safety systems, making this heavy descent extremely dangerous. Keith Richards, James Brown, and John Belushi shared this unlikely moment at Studio 54 in New York City in 1980. The photo united a Rolling Stones rebel, the godfather of soul, and one of Saturday Night Live's wildest stars. In 1915, Anita King became the first woman to drive alone across America, traveling from Los Angeles to New York in a Kissel car. Paramount promoted her as the Paramount Girl, while newspapers called her the bravest woman in America. Elsie Alcock was born in this house in 1918 and has lived there for 108 years. Her father first rented it in 1902, and she bought it for just £250 in 1960. Founded in Philadelphia in 1937, the Pyramid Club became a powerful meeting place for the city's black elite. Before closing in 1963, it connected wealthy black collectors with artists from across America and helped build a vital market for black art. In 1954, Albert Einstein walked through Princeton with Hideki Yukawa, John Wheeler, and Homi Bhabha. Together, these four physicists transformed our understanding of nuclear forces, black holes, relativity, and atomic energy. This royal executioner served the ruler of Rewa in central India around 1898 to 1903. His spike-covered armor prevented condemned prisoners from grabbing him, while his massive curved tulwar delivered the fatal blow. Barbara Stanwyck in 1924, before Hollywood knew her name. Still a teenager, she danced in the Ziegfeld Follies at New York's famous New Amsterdam Theater. In 1969, engineers shut off the American Falls for 5 months, using a temporary dam made from 28,000 tons of rock and earth. They drilled into the exposed riverbed to study erosion and decide whether unstable rocks should be removed. Victoria Muspratt lived in this grand Brooklyn house at 71st Street and Shore Road. Just before Christmas in 1934, the elderly woman was murdered there, turning the mansion into one of Bay Ridge's darkest crime stories. A mother proudly poses with her newborn twins while their 6 older brothers gather behind her in the 1940s. The rare family portrait was preserved on Agfa safety film, a safer alternative to highly flammable nitrate film. Peter Sellers sits with his second wife, Britt Eklund, after suffering a series of heart attacks in 1964. He survived, but the damage weakened his heart and contributed to his death 16 years later. B-17 bombers of the 490th Bomb Group fly through dense German anti-aircraft fire in 1944. Each black burst could tear through the aircraft, yet the crews had to hold formation to protect one another. This is the Italian Littorina Armata, nicknamed Libli, an armored rail car deployed in occupied Yugoslavia between 1942 and 1943. Protected by thick armor and armed turrets, it patrolled railway lines and fought partisan attacks in areas where ordinary trains were easy targets. This is Grozny after the Battle of 1999, when Russian airstrikes and artillery devastated much of the Chechen capital. The United Nations later called it the most destroyed city on Earth. Yet Grozny was rebuilt within a few years. A Vietnamese soldier emerges from a hidden tunnel in 1966, while another pulls him to the surface. These narrow underground networks concealed fighters, weapons, hospitals, and command rooms from enemy forces. 2 school children play in the rubble of the Bronx during the 1970s, surrounded by burned-out cars and abandoned buildings. Years of disinvestment, population loss, and widespread arson turned entire neighborhoods into ruins, while thousands of families still lived there. A young Chamorro boy grips a crucifix while being taken to a civilian internment camp during the Battle of Saipan in July 1944. Thousands of civilians were trapped in the fighting, and many died before the island fell to American forces. During the Romanian Revolution in December 1989, protesters threw Nicolae Ceausescu's portrait from the town hall in Odorhaiu Secuiesc. The falling image captured the sudden collapse of a dictatorship that had ruled Romania for 24 years. Jessie Tarbox Beals captured this rare nighttime suffrage march in New York during the early 1910s, when low-light photography was extremely difficult. One of America's first female photojournalists, she used demanding early equipment to preserve women marching for the right to vote. In January 1997, warm rain melted the deep Sierra snowpack and pushed the Truckee River into downtown Reno. The flood caused roughly $1 billion in damage across the region, shutting casinos and turning city streets into dangerous channels. In 1941, a woman stands in the doorway of the rough shack she shared with her husband near Manchester, North Carolina. He worked at Fort Bragg, yet the couple lived in a home made from little more than wood and tar paper. This Soviet Joseph Stalin, 2 heavy tank from the 87th Guards, Heavy Tank Regiment was destroyed during the brutal siege of Breslau in 1945. The city refused to surrender for nearly 3 months, holding out even after Berlin was surrounded. Monsoon rain floods a company area at Cantho Airfield in 1968, turning the base into a muddy lake. Soldiers still lived and worked inside these metal huts while the Vietnam War continued around them. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Birmingham in 1963 for marching against racial segregation without a permit. While jailed, he wrote the famous letter from Birmingham jail on scraps of paper smuggled out by his lawyers. Charles Arthur Floyd was a notorious bank robber during the Great Depression, better known as Pretty Boy Floyd. Stories claimed he burned mortgage papers during robberies to free families from debt. But historians have never confirmed this famous tale. In the 1970s, Kabul had nightclubs, cinemas, and fashionable parties where young Afghans mixed local styles with Western trends. This nightlife largely disappeared after the Soviet invasion in 1979 and the decades of war that followed. Before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iranian women could vote, attend university, serve as judges, and choose whether to wear a veil. After the revolution, compulsory hijab laws and sweeping legal restrictions transformed women's public lives. A survivor of the Andes plane crash looks into the camera after rescue on December 22, 1972. 16 people survived 72 days in the frozen mountains after being presumed dead. Around 1900, Ponca couple Monchita, known as Dustmaker, and Mahunga, known as Standing Buffalo, posed for this wedding photograph in Oklahoma. Their people had been forced from Nebraska to Indian Territory only decades earlier. An armed Yugoslav partisan poses for a rare photograph during the Nazi occupation in 1943. Around 100,000 women joined the resistance, fighting, carrying messages, and treating wounded soldiers. 2 minutes after the atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, this massive cloud rose above the burning city. The blast killed tens of thousands instantly and destroyed nearly every building within 1 mile. Finnish sappers test a captured Soviet ROKS-2 flamethrower in Onis in March 1943. Its fuel tank looked like an ordinary backpack, while the flame nozzle was disguised as a rifle to stop enemy soldiers from recognizing and targeting the operator. A United States B-52 takes off from Andersen Air Force Base during the Vietnam War. In December 1972, Operation Linebacker 2 sent these bombers against Hanoi and Haiphong for 11 days, dropping more than 15,000 tons of bombs. A Japanese kamikaze explodes on the aircraft carrier Enterprise off Kyushu during the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. Lieutenant Shunsuke Tomiyasu struck the forward elevator with such force that it was blasted about 120 meters into the air. German soldiers marched captured Jewish civilians through the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto in May 1943. After nearly a month of resistance, the Nazis crushed the uprising, burned the district, and deported thousands to concentration and extermination camps. This is James Hong in his high school yearbook in 1947. At 97, he is still acting after an extraordinary career spanning more than 7 decades and over 600 screen credits. Charles Sherwood Stratton and Lavinia Warren became world-famous performers after their lavish wedding in 1863 drew huge crowds and major headlines during the American Civil War. Known as General Tom Thumb, Stratton gained fame under P.T. Barnum before age 10, then toured the world with Lavinia. From 1967 to 1986, Albania's communist regime covered the country with hundreds of thousands of concrete bunkers, preparing for an invasion that never came. The vast project drained national resources, and these shelters became lasting symbols of fear and oppression. On this day in 1958, 14-year-old Cheryl Crane fatally stabbed Johnny Stompanato as he attacked her mother, Hollywood star Lana Turner. Stompanato was an abusive enforcer for mobster Mickey Cohen, and a coroner's jury ruled the killing justifiable homicide. A young Michelle Obama stands with her mother Marion, father Fraser, and older brother Craig in Chicago in the 1970s. Her father battled multiple sclerosis while working at a city water plant, and his discipline deeply shaped the future First Lady. A National Guardsman questions a driver during the violent protests outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. Nearly 12,000 police officers, soldiers, and federal agents flooded the city as clashes erupted in Grant Park and surrounding streets. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the final time. The Russian tricolor replaced it, marking the end of a superpower that had shaped world history for nearly 70 years. German military attaché Franz von Papen leaves New York on December 22, 1915, after America expels him for directing a secret sabotage network. Seized documents exposed plots to destroy factories, railways, and ships supplying Germany's enemies. German strongwoman Katharina Sandwina became famous for lifting her husband sideways and defeating Eugen Sandow in a weightlifting contest. She turned that fame into a weapon against misogyny, publicly fighting for women's rights and health when few female performers dared to speak out. On April 5, 1976, billionaire Howard Hughes died at age 70 after 15 years hidden from public view. His body was so thin and unrecognizable that investigators used fingerprints to confirm his identity. Michael and Robert Rosenberg read the news after their parents were sentenced to death for passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed in 1953, leaving the two boys orphaned. In 1942, Swedish warships hid beneath camouflage nets against the cliffs of Smerkullen. Their hulls blended with the rock so well that enemy aircraft could pass overhead without spotting them. Police escort Varg Vikernes after his arrest on August 19, 1993, just 9 days after he killed black metal guitarist Øystein Aarseth. The murder exposed a violent feud inside Norway's underground music scene, and Vikernes later received the country's maximum sentence of 21 years. On the 31st of July, 1975, Ulster Volunteer Force gunmen stopped the Miami show band at a fake military checkpoint and secretly planted a bomb in their minibus. The bomb exploded early, killing 2 attackers before the surviving gunman murdered 3 band members. On June 15, 1996, the Provisional Irish Republican Army detonated a massive truck bomb in central Manchester during the European Championship. The blast injured more than 200 people, but advance warnings helped police evacuate about 75,000 people, preventing any deaths. A Viet Minh soldier shakes hands with a wounded French prisoner after the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in May 1954. The crushing defeat ended French rule in Indochina and divided Vietnam into North and South. On July 16, 1945, 13-year-old Barbara Kent and her fellow campers played near Ruidoso just hours after the first atomic bomb exploded 40 miles away. They caught radioactive fallout on their tongues, thinking it was snow, and Kent later said she was the only girl who survived past 30. Adolf Hitler is photographed shortly after the failed assassination attempt of July 20, 1944. A bomb exploded only feet away, leaving him with burned legs, cuts, and damaged eardrums, while 4 other men later died. An American soldier and a Mexican soldier stand face to face at the Arizona border in 1915, armed and separated by a simple wooden marker. 3 years later, fighting erupted at Nogales in one of the rare battles fought directly across the United States and Mexico border. On April 16, 1945, liberated prisoners at Bergen-Belsen chased and beat a former capo, an inmate chosen by the Nazis to police others. This violent reckoning came one day after British troops entered the camp. Vietnam veteran S. Brian Wilson sits on the tracks moments before a train struck him during a weapons shipment protest. He tried to move, but the train was traveling 3 times the legal speed and crushed both of his legs. On September 11, 2001, terrified people fled through Lower Manhattan as a massive dust cloud surged from the collapse of the South Tower. The cloud contained pulverized concrete, glass, and toxic debris, turning daylight into near darkness within seconds. Egyptian women joined the 1919 revolution, marching in public against British rule despite the risk of arrest and gunfire. On March 16th, hundreds protested in Cairo, turning women into a powerful force in Egypt's fight for independence. This photo does not show the Vatican Concordat. Hitler is greeting Protestant Reich Bishop Ludwig Müller with Catholic abbot Alban Schachleiter between them. The treaty was signed in 1933 by Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, the future Pope Pius XII, and Franz von Papen, not Hitler. At 4 in the morning on June 22, 1918, an empty troop train slammed into a stopped Hagenbeck-Wallace circus train near Hammond, Indiana. The wooden sleeping cars burst into flames, killing 89 circus workers and performers and injuring about 150. In 1979, students at Tehran University pulled down a statue of Shah Pahlavi as his government collapsed. The scene captured a historic turning point just weeks before Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile and the Iranian monarchy ended. This bizarre 1959 contest challenged people to push a single pea along the pavement using only their noses. One wrong move could send the pea into a crack, forcing the contestant to crawl after it in front of the crowd. In 1959, a diver used powerful suction hoses to clean the bottom of an aquarium at the Miami Seaquarium. The bulky gear made a routine job look like a mission on another planet. Jack Everard repeatedly ate sandwiches stuffed with cigarettes, reportedly swallowing up to 40 cigarettes every day. In this photo, he bites into one after adding sweet and spicy Ingelhofer mustard. At Butlin's holiday camp in England in 1952, beauty contestants wore eerie papier-mâché masks so judges would score only their figures. This photograph captures the women lying down as staff distribute the identical Marilyn Monroe faces. This woman is demonstrating an automatic milk lock, a door-mounted device designed for safe, contactless deliveries. The milkman placed the bottle inside from the hallway, but only the resident could remove it, protecting the milk from thieves, dirt, and tampering. A French soldier escorts 2 Algerian prisoners tied together with a rope during the Algerian War. France fought to keep Algeria under colonial rule, and the brutal conflict killed hundreds of thousands before independence in 1962. Philippe de Gaulle, son of Free France leader Charles de Gaulle, reads the Order of the Day in Normandy in 1944. He fought with General Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division and later helped liberate Paris from German occupation. In 1940, Adolf Hitler returned to a trench near Fromelles in northern France, where he had served during the First World War. German officers followed him through the overgrown battlefield he had last seen as a young soldier. This box of German steel hand granite stick grenades was reportedly unearthed in Ukraine, still packed almost exactly as soldiers received it. After decades underground, the explosives may remain deadly, despite the heavy rust. On April 8, 1968, garment workers at the Abe Schreider shop stopped to hear Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial service on a portable radio. His funeral took place the next day in Atlanta, 4 days after his assassination. On August 12, 1945, Japanese prisoners in Marikina, Philippines, read that their country had offered to surrender. Their stunned faces captured the moment they realized the war was ending, 3 days before Japan announced its surrender. At 23, Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of John and Robert Kennedy, was forced to undergo a lobotomy arranged by her father. The operation caused severe brain damage, leaving her unable to speak clearly or walk normally for the rest of her life. On December 11, 1994, Russian forces entered Chechnya, beginning a war that reduced much of Grozny to ruins. 2 brutal conflicts followed, killing tens of thousands of civilians, while the full death toll remains disputed, and Russia has never faced comprehensive accountability. This is believed to be the last photo of Simo Häyhä, taken before his death at age 96 in 2002. During the Winter War, the Finnish sniper was credited with more than 500 Soviet kills, the highest known total for any sniper in a major war. On August 30, 1963, white teenagers protested as the Horace Baker family became the first black family to move into Delmar Village in Fulcroft, Pennsylvania. The family faced an angry crowd simply for entering their new home. In 1946, hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses sat in endless rows, waiting to be destroyed after surviving the Second World War. These bombers had cost fortunes to build, but many were soon stripped, crushed, and melted into aluminum. Uday Hussein smokes a cigar beside his younger brother Qusay in 2001, 2 years before their violent deaths. Both men were killed by American forces after a 4-hour gun battle in Mosul on July 22, 2003. This Baltimore coffee shop in 1930 covered its windows with a full menu, turning the storefront into a giant price board. Coffee cost 5 cents, oyster stew 10 cents, and a roast beef dinner only 15 cents. Ustaše guards for us a Jewish prisoner to remove his ring after he arrives at Jasenovac in occupied Yugoslavia. Between 1941 and 1945, the Ustaše murdered tens of thousands of Serbs, Jews, Roma, and political opponents in this camp system. During the liberation of France in 1944, women accused of helping German occupiers or having relationships with soldiers were dragged into public and had their heads shaved. Called les tondus, they were often punished without trial, while crowds watched, mocked, and photographed them. Dickie Chappelle photographed the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, then covered the Hungarian uprising in 1956. On November 4, 1965, the 47-year-old reporter was killed by mine shrapnel while patrolling with United States Marines in Vietnam. Ludmila Pavlichenko, nicknamed Lady Death, was credited with killing 309 enemy soldiers during World War II. In 1942, a mortar blast wounded her, and the Soviet Union removed its deadliest female sniper from combat. On September 10, 1968, a 6'5" American machine gunner crossed a muddy Mekong Delta stream almost completely underwater. Only his M60 remained visible, held above the surface to keep the weapon ready to fire. This shocking 1987 image of Klaus Kinski attacking Werner Herzog during Cobra Verde was actually staged as a joke. Their real relationship was volatile enough, and after 5 films filled with furious clashes, this became their final collaboration. Tatiana Romanova, the second daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, was photographed here at 17 in 1914. Known as the governess for her discipline, she later nursed wounded soldiers during the First World War before being executed with her family in 1918. In December 1943, life photographer Elliot Elisifan captured an Italian-American family sharing dinner in Tarrytown, New York. Above them hangs a portrait of their son, killed during the Allied invasion of Sicily only months earlier. Nurse Dorothy Davis, one of the famous angels of Bataan, smiles beside her sister after surviving years as a Japanese prisoner of war. She was freed from Santo Tomas prison camp in the Philippines in February 1945. This brutal glove-mounted knife was known as the Srbosjek, meaning Serb cutter. Ustaše guards used blades like it to murder Serbian prisoners at Jasenovac and other concentration camps in Croatia between 1941 and 1945. An Iranian general leaps over a row of fixed bayonets during a fitness demonstration in the 1980s. The dangerous stunt demanded perfect timing, as one mistake could have caused fatal injuries. In 1945, Marshal Josip Broz Tito watched his troops march through Belgrade after 4 years of brutal occupation. His partisans had fought both Nazi forces and local collaborators, helping Tito emerge as the leader of a new socialist Yugoslavia. On May 5, 1989, Israeli soldiers shot and killed Palestinian Christian child Milad Anton Shaheen during the First Intifada. In this haunting photograph, a Palestinian protester salutes Shaheen's portrait as women gather beneath it. In 1951, Matt Ingram faced prison after a white teenager accused him of assault, even though he was more than 70 feet away and never touched her. His case became known as reckless eyeballing, exposing how a black man's glance could become a crime under Jim Crow. On September 22, 1975, an elderly woman was knocked down as crowds panicked after Sarah Jane Moore fired at President Gerald Ford in San Francisco. The shot missed after former Marine Oliver Sipple grabbed Moore's arm, while a stranger stayed behind to comfort the injured woman. On July 8, 1975, Andre the Giant effortlessly lifted quarterback Joe Theismann with one arm. Theismann stood 6 feet tall and weighed about 190 pounds, yet Andre made the professional athlete look like a child. Johnny Cash is pictured with his first wife, Vivian Liberto, and their 4 daughters before his affair with June Carter destroyed their marriage. After Vivian filed for divorce in 1966, her church temporarily barred her from communion until Cash admitted that his behavior caused the breakup. In 2003, pizza driver Brian Wells robbed this Pennsylvania bank with a homemade bomb locked around his neck. He told police that strangers had forced him into the crime, but the bomb exploded 3 minutes before the bomb squad arrived, killing him instantly. In 1963, Felicette became the first and only cat launched into space, reaching 157 kilometers before returning safely by parachute. 2 months later, scientists killed her to study her brain, and her historic mission was largely forgotten for decades. This is the truck where Ken McElroy, the feared bully of Skidmore, Missouri, was shot dead in broad daylight on July 10, 1981. More than 40 people witnessed the killing, yet nobody identified the shooters, and no one was ever charged. Violette Morris won 3 medals at the 1922 Women's World Games before French officials banned her for defying their rules on female behavior. She later attended the 1936 Olympics as Hitler's guest and was killed in 1944 after collaborating with the Nazis. In August 1941, German soldiers tied this man to a street post in the occupied Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic after accusing him of theft. Local residents, including children, were forced to witness his public humiliation and punishment. In 1940, this hat maker proudly displayed what was billed as the world's largest top hat. The enormous cylinder towered over him and was wide enough to cover his entire body. In 1954, hydrogen bomb pioneer Edward Teller proposed Sundial, a 10-gigaton weapon 200 times more powerful than the Tsar Bomba. The blast could have devastated an area the size of France, but the Air Force canceled the project before it was built. Born Jenny Irene Hodgers, Albert Cashier fought in 40 battles with the 95th Illinois Infantry during the American Civil War. He lived as a man for at least 53 years, and his birth sex was discovered only after he developed dementia. In 1917, German submarine UC-61 ran aground on a sandbar off the French coast and could not escape. Hours later, Belgian cavalry rode onto the beach and captured it, in one of the rare cases when horsemen defeated a submarine. In 1896, Bridget Driscoll became the first pedestrian in Britain recorded as killed by a motor car after stepping into its path at Crystal Palace. Witnesses said the car was moving at a reckless 7 kilometers per hour, and Driscoll froze when she saw it. In 1944, British medium Helen Duncan became the last person jailed under the Witchcraft Act after claiming to summon dead spirits. Her famous ectoplasm was exposed as cheesecloth, and she remained in prison until 1945. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most.